we will draw the Ottoman Empire because we are discussing the origins of the Israeli-Palestine problem, which is, if anything, most problematic in this day and age right now. Back in the 1800s, the Ottoman Empire, which started maybe around the 16th century, 17th century, so it was still going in the 1800s. Let's just, as a rough description, let's draw it out. It's not going to be very accurate, but for all intents and purposes of showcasing what's happened here with this Jewish immigration and repopulation and domination of foreign governments, etc., we'll be able to get an accurate understanding of what's happened here, or at least the broad thrust of it. So let's say this is the Ottoman Empire. Let's say this area here is Israel, Palestine, mandatory Palestine. So what happened originally, before this territory was marked out and called mandatory Palestine, this Ottoman Empire was involved in World War I, and the team that it was fighting with alongside, that team lost the war. So then this empire was said to be divided up between English and French and Russian forces and Arab peoples. This bit of land here was marked out, and the Arab peoples thought that their agreement included that bit of land, but as far as I can tell, the agreement between the Arabs and the British side of the war, it didn't exactly specify this exact piece of land. The British actually said they want something west of Damascus that will be not included in the deal, and the Arab people did not come back and say, hey, you better not be talking about this part here. Anyway, when this land was split up, everyone got something. The Arabs did get something. They got quite a bit of land. And so this whole territory was split up, became Iraq and Lebanon and Syria, maybe Jordan, maybe even Egypt. But what's important to consider here is that this whole Ottoman Empire was broken up, and different territories were allocated to different governments to run, to help facilitate the proceeds of the states, of the territories, the peoples. And what happened with this little bit of land here, well, Britain took direct control of it. And in 1917, just shortly before World War I finished, Britain, through someone, Arthur or something, they made the Balfour Declaration, which basically said we're going to commit ourselves, our energy and resources to establishing a Jewish homeland. And it's going to be somewhere around here. And by this time, the Jewish population percentage was about 11%. Jews. But back in 1800, at the start of the 19th century, it was actually only about 2.5%. So there was already a growing number of Jewish people there, perhaps because around this time there was a growing number of pogroms where Jewish people were rounded up and killed due to social issues, paranoia, maybe just in-group, out-group competition turning into violence. One thing is for sure, that there was no country where the Jewish people are the majority. Not since 1200 BC. Back in 1200 BC, the Jewish people, the people who are into this Hebrew culture, they dominated this area around here somewhere. Basically like a significant portion of what was marked out as mandatory Palestine back in 1200 BC, 1200 BC. The Jewish people dominated that. They had the majority of the population. During this time, eventually the Babylonians came and destroyed their kingdom, and they were kicked out. And then they slightly repopulated again, but then the Romans kicked them out. And actually, a lot of them stayed. When the Christian crusades came along, some of them were killed, some of them were converted. But when the Muslims were there, a lot of them apparently converted to Islam. A lot of the people who had been living there over many generations. Many of them went from being Jewish to becoming Christian to becoming Islamic Muslims. And a lot of Arabic people moved there and married a lot of these people and converted them. But a lot of them also, a significant number of them also left the area because they had to pay extra taxes that the Muslims didn't have to pay. Basically, to be a Jew here was harder living than to be a Jew somewhere else. But somewhere else too, the world proved over many centuries that it's hard to be a Jew living basically anywhere. And yet these people still grew in population sizes, the people dedicated to this religion, culture, way of life, being a Jew. I believe it was the 13th and the 14th century were the worst times for being a Jew in the world. Perhaps thousands at a time were slaughtered because of paranoia, social issues. Apparently they were blamed for causing plagues. And they were also, as most people know, they were blamed for killing Jesus. So around the world in 1800s, there were many Jewish people living, way more Jewish people living around the world than here. And we should concede, we should understand that their whole culture and religion is about being from here and one day being here when the Messiah arrives and the world is saved and, well, I don't know. Eventually they're going to be here when their Messiah arrives, and that hasn't happened yet. So regardless of them having left for centuries and bred into other races and acquired other characteristics, cultural characteristics from other cultures, they essentially maintained the Hebrew culture, and they were bullied for it they were outcasted in many ways and killed often, literally, for it. Why they didn't have their own country? Well, many cultures don't have their own country. For example, in India, there are many cultures of people who don't have the majority in any state at all. The fact that these Jewish people, though, they've been around for quite a while and their presence is quite known. They're quite industrious, quite educated often, wherever they are. These people want to have their own country, especially in the light of all the pogroms that were happening. It makes sense that many of them will begin to become very interested in having their own country, and this little bit of land made a lot of sense to them as to where they might live and start their own country. And it also fit their idea of maybe that's when the Messiah will come back. Maybe it's all true, their cultural story, their prophesied story. So the population numbers were already increasing before the end of World War II, since the 1800s. And apparently, from what I've found when I'm looking into the numbers, around about the start of the 1800s, the end of the 18th century perhaps, the Jewish population in this area, in the ancient Hebrew territory, it was perhaps lower than it had ever been, ever since the Jews became the majority in 1200 BC. And then suddenly they start repopulating, and then in 1917 they start repopulating quite fast because of the Balfour Declaration. And once Britain and its peoples won the World War One, once Britain and them won World War One, it was apparent that the gates were being held open for Jewish people to come here and live here, and they were being ensured security protection from the British monarchy or the British peoples. So many of these Jewish people all around the world began to come here and live here legally. They weren't coming here and stealing land. They were buying land. They were creating businesses, farms, etc., shops. And during this time when the Jewish people, around about 1920, 1917, when it became obvious that they were swelling in population, it is apparent that the Arab Muslims started killing them, saying, what the F is this? These people are going to have their own security force soon, and then they're going to take over this area. I think also the Arab Muslims were the ones who initiated the first major massacre in Hebron. And then the British soldiers came along and killed a lot of people because of that, to try to say, don't do that. And by about 1930, just after the Hebron massacre, the Jewish people made up about 17% of this area, of this land. Not all in one location, just spread out all across, but this represents how many Jews were living there. This is like our pie chart or our sausage chart. And then by 1945, many Jews, from 1930 to 1945, the Jewish people doubled in population. They became about 30%. because of World War II and other things as well in Russia, and just the general here around the world, hearing that Jews are being welcomed to come and repopulate this area. By repopulate, I mean the culture of people who dominated this area and then spread across the world and maintained that culture and that story of being from here and having to receive their Messiah when they're here eventually. These people started to repopulate. Maybe they also, not more so than wanting the Messiah to come back or having some connection to the land, they just wanted any place at all, probably a lot of them, where they could just live and hope to have a state of their own. That was majority Jewish people. So you can see why thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of Jewish people, ancient Hebrew cultural people, wanted to come back here. And you can see that they're innocent. They weren't thinking, yeah, I'll go back there, kill some Arab Muslim, and then take their land. No, they were going there thinking, there's plenty of vacant land there, and there's plenty of lands that I can buy and houses that people will be willing to sell me. So I'll go there and I'll live there. Because especially that now that the British government is saying that they will provide us protection to do this and help. So then by 1947, the Jewish people made up 33% of this land. 33% were all Jews. And then here's where the Arab Muslims make a major mistake, in my opinion. Because we had this Ottoman Empire originally, and then the government that was running that, the last caliphate basically, the Islamic State, it was involved in a world war and it lost. And then this Ottoman Empire was split up. This one little part of it, Britain took control of and called it Mandatory Palestine. Before that, it was just the Ottoman Empire. There were some names of towns there, obviously. So once it was called Mandatory Palestine, eventually by 1947, 33% of the population there was Jewish. And the United Nations, everyone around the world actually, was planning on sending even more Jews there. It was becoming like a hot idea at the time for Jews and for people who hated Jews. They all were thinking, yeah, Jewish people should just move there. And since apparently the Arab Muslims started the first bit of a knifing, and then they kicked off the first major massacre in 1929, there had just been a back and forth between Jewish forces and Arab Muslim forces, constantly back and forth. Here's the big mistake. The United Nations, which is basically the democracy of the whole world, a kind of democratic body for the whole world, it said, we actually think that this should happen. Half the land should be given to the Muslim Arabs, and half that land in this territory here called Mandatory Palestine since 1917 or 1918. And when I say half, I mean 55% went to the Jewish forces and 45% went to the Arab forces, and both of them claim that they got an unfair deal because one part of the land had better features in one way and another part had better features in another way. In my opinion, it was a fair deal, especially considering that basically the whole world had this idea where many Jewish people would leave their country of being suppressed or being attacked in pogroms, and they're going to come here, and so that population is going to triple or quadruple very soon, if it can, if all things go okay. So this is when Israel was born. The UN petition said, yeah, you guys, Israel, you Jews take this part, and you Muslims take the other part. Jews, Muslims. The Jews said, whatever, okay. The Muslim Arabs said no. They officially said no, and they have said officially that they vow to stop these Jewish forces owning the land that was stipulated as going to the Jewish peoples. And they also kicked off with an attack, but they said that it was a retaliation for some back and forth that had been happening for ages. But as far as I can see, the Arab Muslims, they also kicked off more attacks. They basically started a full-scale protest in violence about this United Nations. This was a mistake because it gave Israel the excuse to go, okay, well, by the way, Britain withdrew in 1948, and then Israel declared its independence then and there, basically the next day. And then the next day after that, the Arabs invaded, the whole Arab army. But back in 1947, when partition was proposed, that's when the Arab Muslim forces immediately started fighting. But it wasn't until 1948 that gangs from all these surrounding territories came to invade Israel and to support the Arab Muslims, to say there shall be no Jewish state here. They came to have a war and they got beaten. And while they're getting beaten, many people inside the Jewish territory were scared away. Some say it was because the Jewish forces were hacking them with machetes, just getting them away. Some say it was because the Arab forces were saying, hey, get out of there because you'll die if you just stay there, and we're going to wipe them all out anyway, and then we'll just take back the whole area. Probably a bit of both. You got to remember, a lot of these Jewish forces soldiers, they would have been psychologically damaged people. They would have been enduring great hardships and just thought, well, I'm going to go on a massacre now to try to just sort this all out, and so that my progeny don't have to keep having this war. They might have thought things like that. And then after this massive war, where all these Arab states, Arab forces got together and came to settle Israel, to say you can't exist, they got beaten. What happened was the Jewish territory turned into everything except basically these couple of little bits. And also hundreds of thousands of Jews are either kicked out they're either kicked out or they're just influenced to come here because of some anger from the Arab Muslims, because they just got beaten in this war where they thought they were going to wipe out this Jewish state. Apparently the culture has kind of turned against their Jewish inhabitants and said, get the F out of here. Or the Jews just got scared and left anyway. Or the Jews were thinking, hey, that sounds like a pretty good place to live. They just defended against all these Arab forces. Let's go and move there. And they're all Jews, so we'll be better off. We'll be happier. We'll be treated as first-class citizens or whatever. And also all around the world, since after the World War II, many Jews were coming here from concentration camps, etc. And even just coming there because they heard it's a good idea. So the Jewish number really swelled, and by 1951, the Jewish population became the majority in this entire area, which was originally called Mandatory Palestine after World War I. The Jewish majority became a reality for the first time since sometime around 1000 BC. And these two little bits of land here, let's call this, say this is West Bank. Jordan ended up, a country named Jordan, or Transjordan, ended up taking control of that. And this country, Egypt, took control of this little part called Gaza. Jordan and Egypt didn't say, we want you guys to be your own little country. Jordan and Egypt probably had ambitions to turn that little bit into their own country. So, and by the way, the countries who got together to come and finish Israel, as it just declared itself existing, those countries were Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. And also the people who ended up shoved into this little area, they would have been fighting as well. But unfortunately for them, the Israeli army was really quite advanced in technology and tactics and experience, apparently. So you got to think, these people who are living here who had that war in 1947, a lot of them had been born there from many generations, from earlier in the 1900s. Many of them really would have thought it was their home, especially considering their culture is all about being from here and having to wait there for their Messiah. You know, the Muslims, their culture, they're from somewhere down near Saudi Arabia. They're special, man. Christians, they had the teaching that it doesn't matter where you are, you just got to be with God, and you can be. So all these people shoved in this little area, how were they treated? I don't know. Should they have just moved out of here and been with the people of the same culture and same race? Maybe. But they were probably pretty keen to hang on to this little bit of land, because here's maybe the crux of the matter. This is the most coveted bit of land on earth. The most people wanting to live in one place, this is that place out of any place on earth. So these people, maybe they should have tried to become Transjordan. What's wrong with that? Maybe they should have tried to become Egypt. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with them going back and living in their homes after the big war happened with all these Arab peoples in 1948? Well, apparently Israel had security concerns, and also Israel got flooded with maybe like 700,000 more Jewish people in those couple of years who wanted to live here and who were kicked out apparently because of so much anger towards Jews after the Arab coalition just got dominated in battle, in war. So the Jewish people would have been thinking, well, many of them would have been thinking, that's very sad that there's so many people now squeezed into these little areas, but it's also very sad that we had the war, and it's also very sad that we couldn't just live here, and the UN couldn't just give us a piece of the land, and you just couldn't have just let us be and just accepted your land and for the first time claim some kind of state here. Because remember, there was never a state here called Palestine that wasn't dominated by Britain. Before that, it was just the Ottoman Empire, and all these peoples are basically homogenous. It's sad that they couldn't have just said, okay, let's take this bit of land. They wouldn't have been flooded with refugees or immigrants from all over the world who are Arab Muslims saying, we want to live here too. No, but the Israeli Jews would have been, and they were, and they did get. So, the Arab Muslims who got given this piece of land and said, you can call that your state, they should have been happy. They could have been happy with that. It was a world democratic body saying, we back this, and they chose to say, no, we're going to fight against it. So then the next sad part of the story is 1967, Egypt, Jordan and Syria get into a war with Israel. Why? Let's not get into why. It just happened. And these bits of land were taken. That one taken from Israel, that one taken from Jordan. So Israel now takes responsibility of this land and these peoples. And this might be illegal, to take responsibility over peoples and not assimilate them into your citizenship. I don't know. It might be a good idea to not do that, because if you do, then you're going to have havoc and a lot of killing and bloodshed perhaps, or poverty. So they left them there, and over time, over the next 40 years, there was a bit of trying for peace and also a bit of wanting to keep fighting this newly established Jewish state, which by about 1951, as I said, the Jews were more numerous than the Arab Muslims there. You might be saying, well, no one should move there, and it should be always just given to whoever lives there. Maybe. Or maybe the people who defeated this whole empire have a bit of a moral right to say, we want this little part here to be for these people who are all over the world, who their whole culture, their whole story is about for being from here. And they don't have any country at all where they're the majority. We want to help them have a majority country. That makes a bit of sense to me. But overall, personally, I'm neutral on whether this was a good or bad thing, all these Jews moving here. But after the 67 war, 1967, these peoples became kind of in a concentration camp run by Israel instead of Jordan and Egypt. But they had some rights, they had some abilities to make foods and get foods, etc. I don't think they ever hung up the idea of killing all these Jews and making sure there's no Jewish state anywhere around here, or around here even. And that's unfortunate, because it turned into, eventually they elected Hamas. And I believe if they just dropped all their idea of having a war against Israel and said, yeah, we had a great opportunity back in 1947 to take a part of this land and call it whatever we wanted, Palestine or whatever, and it would be our own state, but instead we chose to go to war. If only they could have said, well, let bygones be bygones. Let's try to make these two little parts here our own state, or let's try to be a part of these peoples or Israel itself. But unfortunately, too many of these peoples kept fighting these peoples in a way that took advanced planning and significant amounts of energy. So as to say, it wasn't just a couple of strays. It wasn't just a couple of mutants. And then they eventually elected Hamas, which openly said, we reject this Israel state. We don't think it has the right to exist at all. And the next big mistake was that October 7th attacks ended up happening, which was caused by militarization of these peoples in here, turning all these places in with tunnels and turning it into a place ready to actively fight these Israelis and launch assaults on these Israelis. And whilst this was happening, these back and forths. The Israelis too committed illegal acts, war crimes, outright just murder against these people, because they're all damaged humans. They're all humans, all these. But overall, in the broad thrust of it, it was a bad idea for these peoples to want to keep fighting this obviously dominant state or culture. And it's not just these peoples, it's peoples all around the world supporting this and supporting that. People's egging these people on to keep fighting and holding the line. People's egging Jews to move here and call it their homeland. And I believe that if these Hamas people were more about peace and assimilation and becoming the best that they can be by either becoming Jordan or Egypt or part of Israel or two little states, they would have come forth with olive branches, whole olive trees. They would have come forth pleading for peace and acceptance. But instead, they came along with weapons and then they retreated to their tunnels. And Israel, unfortunately, was sick of it. It killed a lot of people in the last 2 years or so, trying to send a message that you shall not try to fight us, because this will happen. And we are sick of even losing one innocent person because you want to keep fighting us. You want to get at our military. You want to get at our peoples, so you go and kill innocents. We don't even want one innocent to die anymore, and if that means we've got to wipe out thousands of people, well, the people that we're wiping out, they're all propping up this team of humans who want to come and kill our innocent people. It's unfortunate, but I can see the rationale in what they're doing. I wish they had more resources and patience to do it slower and more methodically, but they're not, and they didn't. So you've got this want of not having people pushed out of where they live, or people turned into second-class citizens or whatever. These Muslim Arabs, they kind of were feeling a bit jealous when they saw the British people running this area and seeing to facilities that were for Jewish kids only or whatever. But really, they weren't being forced out anywhere. You've also got this want of having a homeland for Jewish people so that they could have a majority state. Well, I do anyway. And so it kind of makes you think that really was a mistake when the Arab Muslims rejected to have that little piece of land, that half of that land, or 45%. These Jewish people have their story from being from here, their whole culture. And they're coming here, and it's only a little piece of land. These peoples who are complaining, they didn't have all these immigrants flooding there wanting to live with them. They could have easily moved to somewhere around here, and anywhere around here they would have been part of the majority culture, Arab Muslim. So to me it seems that there's more interest in having a Jewish state here than having them just be a minority, than making sure they don't become the majority so that the Arab Muslims don't get angry and start killing them. It seems to me a better interest to have the Jews people move there and become the majority of their state. And unfortunately, the Arabs rejected the UN petition, I should say the Arab Muslims. And then this happened. And unfortunately, the Arab Muslims didn't try to assimilate or move or get over it and become just these two little states. And we have today the aftermath of October 7th.